Welcome to the Bible Weaver, where ancient words breathe again, and every silence carries the echo of heaven. Each parable we tell is not only about those who walked before us, but about us, the wanderers, the wounded, the ones who passed by. Tonight, we journey down a road that everyone feared, a road that began in Jerusalem and descended into shadow, through stone cliffs and desert wind, a road known for robbers, for screams swallowed by silence, for travelers who learned what mercy costs. This is the story that began with a question, "Who is my neighbor?" and ended with an answer that changed the world. This is the Good Samaritan, the stranger who stopped. If this story stirs something in you, if it reminds you that love is not a feeling, but a choice made on the road between comfort and compassion, then walk with us. Subscribe, share, and let the word become flesh again in your heart. Now, imagine the road, narrow, winding, cut through limestone and heat. The air tastes of dust and copper, and in the distance, a man walks alone. He carries nothing but a prayer, in the hope that no one waits for him in the shadows. The road from Jerusalem to Jericho drops nearly 1,000 meters, a journey from temple to valley, from the holy to the human. And it is here, in the dust of this descent, that the kingdom will reveal itself, not in words spoken from heaven, but in hands that choose to lift another from the ground. The man walked alone, the sun pressing hard against his back. The road wound downward through the ravine, twisting between cliffs of red stone that caught the light like fire. It was the kind of path that swallowed sound, where even a cough seemed too loud, where every echo reminded a traveler that he was prey to what waited unseen. He was a merchant, not a soldier. His hands were built for ledgers and trade, not for blades. But business had called him from Jerusalem to Jericho, and so he went, because life rarely asks if the road is safe before it demands that we take it. He carried little: a cloak, a small pouch of coin, a wineskin half full. His steps were measured, his eyes fixed forward, yet behind him, in the folds of the ravine, other footsteps whispered, too soft for certainty, too sure for peace. The wind shifted. The air felt different now, tight, watching. Then came the sound, a scrape of stone, a quick breath, not his own. He turned, but too late. Shadows leapt from behind the rocks. The first blow took him from behind, sharp and heavy. His cry broke against the canyon wall. He tried to speak, but hands silenced him. Rough voices, angry, desperate, demanded his purse. He gave it. They wanted more. They took his cloak, his sandals, the ring from his hand. Still not enough. The violence turned wild, no longer about coin, but cruelty. When they were done, they left him broken on the road, half conscious, half naked, his body twisted in dust and blood. One of them turned back once, as if regret had flickered, then spat on the ground and vanished into the heat. Silence returned. The wind moved again through the ravine, whispering over the stones. Time blurred. The man tried to rise, but pain answered faster than will. His breath came shallow, his vision narrowing to a tunnel of light and shadow. He could hear his own heartbeat, slow, then slower, like the knocking of a gate closing somewhere far away. Above him, the sky burned mercilessly. He tasted earth, tasted iron. "Help," he whispered, but the wind carried it away. The road that had once been his path now became his prison. Hours passed, or minutes, he could no longer tell. And then faintly, footsteps. A figure in white robes approached, framed by the sun. A priest. The wounded man tried to call again, but his voice broke. priest stopped when he saw him. For a moment, he hesitated. The man's blood darkened the dust. His breath came ragged, his eyes half open. The priest looked up the road, then down again. He whispered a prayer under his breath, one meant for duty, not for love, and stepped to the other side. His sandals brushed the rocks quickly, deliberately. Within moments, he was gone. The wounded man tried to move his hand, but it fell limp beside him. His eyes filled, not with tears, but with disbelief. The silence returned. And then, more footsteps. Softer this time, steadier. A Levite. He stopped too, looking down, his face marked by the brief flicker of pity. He knelt, almost. But then his eyes darted toward the cliffs. Fear overruled compassion. He rose, adjusted his robe, and passed by. His shadow fell across the dying man for only a moment before disappearing into light. The road was empty again. Only the hum of flies, the taste of dust, the sound of breath fighting not to stop. The man turned his head to the side. The stones beneath him were warm, too warm. He could smell his own blood drying. He closed his eyes. "Is no one coming?" he murmured to no one. And the sky, wide and unblinking, said nothing. But somewhere down the road, unseen, another set of footsteps began to rise, steady, unhurried, belonging to someone who did not belong, a stranger walking toward mercy. Dust drifted across the broken body like a slow shroud. The road lay empty, stretching pale and silent between cliffs that glowed with cruel light. Then, from the bend beyond the ridge, came the faint sound of hooves. A donkey, steady and unhurried. Beside it walked a man whose clothes marked him as foreign, a Samaritan. His steps were quiet, his eyes scanning the path with the caution of one used to being despised. To the people of Jerusalem, his kind were unclean, heretics, half-bloods. He had learned to keep his distance, to expect no kindness in return. When he saw the shape in the road, he stopped. At first he thought it a heap of rags, but then the wind moved the man's hand. He felt something tighten in his chest. He looked around. No one else. The cliffs were silent. A priest had passed here, he thought. The footprints were still fresh. A Levite too, perhaps. And yet the man still lay bleeding. He knelt. The smell of blood and dust rose to meet him. The stranger's face was swollen, the skin torn along his cheek. His breath came faint, each exhale trembling like the wing of a dying bird. The Samaritan hesitated. He knew the law, he knew the danger. But compassion is faster than reason. He tore a strip from his own robe and pressed it against the wound. The blood was hot against his fingers. "Peace," he whispered, though the man could not hear. "I will not leave you." He poured oil upon the cuts, wine upon the bruises. He lifted the man's head gently, cradling it as though it belonged to a brother. The donkey shifted nervously beside him, sensing the scent of blood. The Samaritan looked down the road. Jericho was still far. He knew this would slow him, cost him, make him late for trade and safety, but love, once seen, cannot be unseen. He lifted the man carefully, his back straining, his knees shaking. He placed him upon the donkey, steadying him with one hand as they began to move. The road that had devoured others now carried mercy on its back. The Samaritan walked beside them, the sun burning his neck, the dust clinging to his feet. But he did not falter. Each step was a prayer. Let him live. Let him live. The man stirred once, trying to speak, his lips cracked and dry. "Why?" he rasped. The Samaritan looked up at him, surprised the words came. "Because you're alive," he said simply. The wounded man's eyes fluttered shut again. By nightfall, they reached an inn on the edge of the valley. The keeper frowned when he saw them. "He's a Jew," he said. "And you," the Samaritan cut him off. "He is my neighbor tonight." He laid the man upon a mat and cleaned the wounds again. Working by lamplight until the bleeding stopped, he stayed awake while the other slept, refilling his cup, cooling his fever. When dawn came, he paid the innkeeper 2 denarii and said, "Care for him. When I return, I will repay whatever more you spend." The innkeeper blinked. "You trust me?" The Samaritan smiled, weary and kind. "We are both debtors of mercy," he said. Outside, the morning wind rose from the desert and carried the smell of rain. The Samaritan looked toward the road he had come from, the same road others had walked past, and for the first time in his life, he did not feel foreign. He turned back toward the inn, whispered a prayer over the man's sleeping form, and stepped into the sunrise, leaving behind not only kindness, but the proof that love, when lived, is stronger than lineage. The man awoke to the sound of wind and the slow creak of wooden beams. His first thought was that he was dead. The light that filtered through the small window was soft, golden, moving gently across the room like a hand searching for forgiveness. His body ached everywhere, a dull, heavy pain that reminded him he was still of flesh, still breathing. He tried to move, but his ribs answered with fire. A groan escaped his lips. Footsteps approached. The door opened, and a man stepped in carrying a basin of water. His face was partly in shadow, but his voice was calm. "You should rest," he said. The wounded man tried to sit up, but the other knelt beside him and eased him back down. "Your wounds are not yet closed." The man's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" The stranger smiled faintly. "No one you were taught to trust." The merchant blinked, trying to understand. Then he saw it, the fringe of the man's robe, the style, the mark of a Samaritan. His heart stumbled in his chest. His people had called them cursed, unclean enemies of God's chosen. "You," he whispered, his voice dry. "Yes," said the Samaritan. "Me." Silence filled the small room, thick as smoke. The merchant turned his face away, ashamed, confused, unwilling to meet the gaze of the one he had hated. The Samaritan dipped a cloth into the basin and began to wash the dust and dried blood from his skin. The touch was gentle, deliberate. The man flinched but did not resist. "I found you on the road," said the Samaritan. "You would have died there." The words struck harder than the stones had. The merchant's throat tightened. "And the priest? The Levite?" "They passed," said the Samaritan quietly. "I saw their footprints." The man's eyes filled with tears he did not expect. "You should have passed too, perhaps," the Samaritan said, wringing the cloth. "But I could not." He stood, pouring fresh oil into a small bowl, and set it beside the mat. "Sleep again. You are safe." The merchant stared at him. "Why would you help me?" The Samaritan looked at him for a long time, then said softly, "Because mercy does not ask who deserves it." The words hung in the air like a psalm half remembered. The wounded man closed his eyes. The tears that fell were not of pain, but of something breaking inside him. Something harder than bone, older than anger. When he woke again, the Samaritan was gone. In his place lay a small folded cloth, clean and white, marked with a streak of red from his own blood. Beneath it, 2 words written in careful hand, "Live well." Outside, the sun rose over the Jericho road. The wind carried the scent of rain. The same road that had seen hatred now washed clean. The merchant looked toward the doorway, toward the world waiting beyond it, and whispered. He stopped. He tried to stand, and though his body shook, he did not fall. Days passed before his strength returned. The wounds began to knit, though the ache in his ribs reminded him of the hands that had lifted him from the dust. The innkeeper watched over him, silent but kind, often repeating the same words the Samaritan had spoken. Rest, he will return. Yet as the days turned into a week and no one came, the merchant felt a different pull, the need to see the road again, to face what had broken him, and perhaps to find the man who had not walked away. He rose at dawn. The world outside the inn was washed in gold and silence. His steps were slow, but steady. He carried nothing but a staff and a small pouch of oil the innkeeper had pressed into his hand. He paid for you, the keeper said quietly, and told me to give you this if you ever walked again. The merchant bowed his head, unable to speak. When he reached the edge of the road, the wind met him like an old memory. The cliffs were the same pale stone, the same scars carved by centuries of rain. Yet everything felt different. The ground that had once betrayed him now seemed sacred. He walked slowly, each step echoing with the faint rhythm of gratitude. The shadows that had once frightened him now felt like witnesses. He came to the place where he had fallen. The blood was gone. The sand had swallowed it. But as he knelt there, he could still see it in his mind. The violence, the abandonment, the mercy. He touched the stones, rough and sun-warmed, and whispered, "You found me here." A caravan passed in the distance, its riders calling greetings. He watched them go, realizing how easily he could have become one more forgotten traveler, buried by indifference. The road stretched on before him, winding through the wilderness. "Where are you now?" he murmured to the unseen Samaritan. "How do I thank you?" The answer came not as a voice, but as memory. Mercy does not ask who deserves it. The words echoed again, clearer than before, alive inside him. He turned back toward Jericho, his heart heavy yet lightened by purpose. Along the way, he saw others, the weary, the poor, a blind beggar sitting by the road. Once, he might have passed them with averted eyes. Now he stopped. He knelt beside the beggar, poured a few drops of oil into the man's cracked hands, and said softly, "You are not alone." The beggar looked up, startled. "Why would you stop for me?" he asked. The merchant smiled. "Because someone once stopped for me." He walked on, the desert wind carrying his robe behind him like a banner of quiet redemption. The road had not changed, but he had. He understood now that mercy was not an act performed once, but a way of walking, a way of seeing. Every face he met could be the next test of his heart. That evening, when the sun dipped low and the world turned the color of fire and dust, he reached a bend where the path met the horizon. He paused, leaning on his staff. The wind rose softly, carrying with it the faint echo of hooves and footsteps long gone. He closed his eyes and smiled. "I will not pass by," he whispered. And somewhere beyond sight, perhaps far down the road, the Samaritan smiled too. When he reached Jericho, the air felt thicker, not with heat, but with habit. It was a city that had learned to survive by forgetting. The markets buzzed, coins clinked, and people hurried through the streets as if compassion were a luxury few could afford. The merchant walked among them quietly, his robe patched, his body still stiff from healing. No one looked twice. No one asked where he had been. He was simply another traveler, returned from the dangerous road. He went first to the temple, where once he had prayed for success and safety. The priest who had passed him on the road was there, leading prayers with a steady voice. The merchant listened from the doorway, his hands trembling. When the prayer ended, he approached slowly. "Rabbi," he said, bowing, "do you remember the road from Jerusalem?" The priest's eyes flicked toward him, cautious, unreadable. "Many roads," he said. "Why ask?" "Because I lay dying on one," said the merchant. "And you walked by." The priest stiffened. Around them, people turned. "You mistake me," he said quickly. "There are laws about purity. I could not risk." "Risk?" the merchant whispered. "You risked nothing, and so I nearly lost everything." The temple went still. The merchant's voice trembled but did not break. "Do you know who saved me? A Samaritan. The one you call unclean touched me when you would not even look." A murmur rose from the gathered crowd. Disbelief, discomfort, whispers like dust. The priest drew back, his face hard. "You should not speak of such things here," he said. "There are ways, traditions. Then your traditions have forgotten the God who wrote mercy first." The merchant said, his voice rising. He turned from the temple and walked into the street, tears burning his eyes. Outside, the noise of the market swallowed his anger. He passed stalls of spice and fabric, the scent of figs and oil in the air. A boy bumped into him and dropped his basket. The merchant knelt, helped him gather the fruit, and smiled. "Be careful on the road," he said gently. The boy grinned, thanked him, and ran off. The merchant watched him go, realizing the truth with sudden clarity. The road was everywhere. Every street, every heart, every moment was another chance to stop or to pass by. The test of mercy was not confined to the wilderness. It waited in every human encounter. That night, as the city lights flickered and faded, he stood on the rooftop of the inn where he was staying. The sky above Jericho was full of stars, the same stars that had shone over him on the road. He thought of the Samaritan, somewhere beyond those hills, perhaps tending another stranger. He whispered into the night, "May I walk as you walked." And the wind moved softly across the rooftops, carrying his prayer into the silence. Word of the merchant's outburst spread through Jericho like fire in dry grass. In the marketplaces and courtyards, in the narrow streets between the olive presses, people whispered of the man who claimed that a Samaritan had saved him. Some pitied him, saying the son had damaged his mind. Others were curious, but the teachers of the law were offended. For them, mercy was a word defined by ritual, not compassion. One afternoon, the merchant was summoned to the hall near the synagogue. There, the scribes and elders sat in a half circle, robes clean, eyes sharp. "We hear strange things," said one. "That you have spoken against the priests of the temple." "I have spoken against indifference," the merchant replied softly. Another leaned forward. "And you praise a Samaritan? You call him righteous?" The merchant met their gaze. "I call him merciful." A ripple of disapproval moved through the room. "You know their kind," said the eldest. "They twist the scriptures, defile our altars. To say such a man is your neighbor is to dishonor your people." The merchant's voice trembled but did not waver. "He did not ask who I was before he lifted me from the dust. He did not weigh my worth. He saw my pain and called it his own. If that is dishonor, then let it be holy." The eldest scribe stood. "You speak with danger. Compassion must be bound by purity, or it becomes chaos." The merchant shook his head. "Compassion bound is no compassion at all. Silence fell. The words hung in the air like thunder waiting to break. One younger scholar, his face troubled, spoke quietly. Perhaps the law and mercy are not enemies. The elder glared at him. You are young. You do not understand. But the younger's eyes stayed on the merchant. Tell me, he said. What did you feel when he helped you? The merchant closed his eyes. Shame first, he said. Then awe, and finally love. Because I saw God in a man I had been taught to hate. No one spoke after that. The torches flickered, the air thick with something larger than argument. Conviction. The merchant bowed slightly and turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused. If the law does not lead to love, he said softly, then perhaps we have built on the wrong foundation. He stepped into the sunlight, leaving the hall in silence. The younger scholar watched him go, his heart unsettled. That night, he could not sleep. The merchant's words kept returning. He saw my pain and called it his own. By morning, the young scholar walked to the edge of the city where the road to Jerusalem began. He stood there a long time, staring at the dust and the stones, wondering what he would do if he ever saw someone fallen there. And for the first time, he prayed not for wisdom, but for courage, the kind that stops. It was near the end of summer when the Samaritan came again to Jericho. The road was the same, winding and dangerous, though less feared now. The merchant said that travelers had begun to help one another. Perhaps mercy, once witnessed, had taken root. The Samaritan rode slowly, his donkey laden with goods, the memory of the wounded man still living quietly within him. He had not returned for thanks, only to see if the man had lived. At the gate of the city he dismounted, brushing the dust from his cloak. The guard eyed him warily, muttering under his breath, but let him through. Old habits die slowly. Prejudice moves like a shadow that the sun must chase 1,000 times before it fades. The Samaritan walked through the market, past the spice sellers and the porters, until he reached the inn where he had left the man. The same innkeeper was there, polishing a jug. When he looked up and saw the traveler, his face lit with surprise. You've returned, he said. He lived. The Samaritan exhaled softly, as though releasing a prayer he had held too long. And where is he now? Here, said a voice behind him. The merchant stood in the doorway, whole but changed. His robe was simple now, his eyes calm. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then the merchant stepped forward, bowed low, and said, I waited to thank you, but there were no words strong enough. The Samaritan shook his head. There never are. Mercy does not keep accounts. They sat together under the awning. The innkeeper brought water, and the two men drank in silence, the way old friends might after a long separation. Finally, the merchant said, I told them what you did. Some believed. Others called it blasphemy. The Samaritan smiled faintly. Mercy often sounds like blasphemy to those who fear it. Still, said the merchant, the word spread. People have begun to help on the road. Some even leave jars of water for strangers. The Samaritan looked toward the hills. Then perhaps the road is healing too. They spoke until the sun began to sink. Before leaving, the Samaritan stood and placed a small stone on the table between them. I took this from the place where you fell, he said, not as a memory of pain, but of the moment mercy was born. The merchant took it in his hands, tracing its rough edge. Then let this stone teach me, he said. Every time I pass a wounded heart, may I remember what you did. The Samaritan smiled again, a quiet, knowing smile. then my journey was worth more than coin. They embraced briefly. Two men once divided by blood and creed, now bound by compassion. When the Samaritan walked away into the desert light, the merchant did not call after him. He knew now that mercy does not end in reunion. It continues in the way one lives after being saved. That night, as the lamps burned low, the merchant placed a stone on his window ledge. The starlight caught it, turning its roughness into something radiant. And he understood. The road had never been cursed. Only hearts had been. And even those could be rebuilt, one act of mercy at a time. That night, sleep did not come easily. The merchant sat beside the small lamp, the stone resting in his hands. It was smooth now from his fingers, warm from his touch, yet heavier than any weight he had ever carried. Gratitude, he realized, was not a feeling that faded after thanks were spoken. It was a call, one that demanded to be lived, not merely felt. He rose before dawn and walked through the still streets of Jericho. The air smelled of bread and dust. The city was waking. He saw beggars near the gate, traders preparing their carts, children chasing each other between the stalls. Every face seemed to hold a question. "What will you do with the mercy given to you?" he began simply. When a widow came to his stall asking for oil, he gave her 2 jars instead of 1. When a debt collector shouted at a poor man, he stepped between them and paid the difference himself. When travelers asked for water, he offered bread as well. People began to notice. Some called him generous, others foolish. "You will bankrupt yourself," one friend said. The merchant smiled. "Better a poor man with peace than a rich man who sleeps through another's cry." But inside, the struggle was real. Each act of kindness carried the shadow of doubt. Was he repaying or truly loving? At night, he would look at the stone and ask, "How much is mercy worth?" No answer came, only silence and the faint echo of the Samaritan's words. Mercy does not keep accounts. One evening, he visited the temple again. The same young scholar who had defended him before greeted him quietly. "You have changed," the scholar said. The merchant nodded. "When mercy touches you, you cannot stay the same." The scholar hesitated. "And yet," he said, "many who hear your story still say the law is greater than compassion." The merchant looked at him with gentle sadness. "Then perhaps they have never truly needed mercy. The one who has been lifted from the dust knows better than the one who's never fallen." The scholar lowered his head. "I think of that road often," he said softly. "I fear I might have walked by too." The merchant placed the stone in his hands. "Then carry this," he said. "Not as guilt, but as a reminder, so that when the road calls, you will not pass by." The young man clutched it tightly, as though it were both wound and promise. When the merchant stepped back into the street, the stars were already rising. He realized that gratitude was not a debt, but a seed. It did not demand repayment, only growth. And from that night on, he began to teach others what he had learned. He told the story not as confession, but as invitation. If mercy finds you, he would say, it is not yours to keep, it is yours to give. And so, the city that once forgot compassion began, slowly, to remember. By the time autumn came, the road from Jerusalem to Jericho no longer carried the same silence. Travelers began to speak of it with a strange reverence, the way people speak of a battlefield that became a garden. What had once been a place of dread was now whispered about as the road of the neighbor. It began with small things, a jar of water left beneath a fig tree, a cloak folded neatly on a rock where the path turned narrow, a loaf of bread sealed in clay, set near the well halfway down the ravine. No one knew who started it. Perhaps a traveler who had heard the merchant's story, or someone who had simply decided to be ready when mercy called. But soon the habit spread. The road that had once devoured the weak began to feed them. The merchant walked it again, this time not in fear but in wonder. He saw footprints, dozens of them, near the place where he had fallen, and beside them, the remnants of a small fire and a note scratched into the dust. If you find someone hurt, stay until they rise. He smiled, tears burning quietly behind his eyes. The stones beneath his feet no longer felt cursed. They hummed with memory, with forgiveness. Every breeze that passed through the canyon seemed to carry faint echoes. The footsteps of those who had once walked by and of the one who had stopped. Further along, he met a caravan of young traders from Samaria. They greeted him kindly, though their accents marked them as outsiders. "We've heard your road is safe now," one said. "They say even strangers help each other here." The merchant nodded. "It is safe because people learned that safety is not the absence of danger. It's the presence of compassion." The youngest of them frowned, thoughtful. "In our village," he said, "they call this the road that healed itself." The merchant smiled at that. "No road heals itself," he said, "but mercy can heal those who walk it." As they journeyed together, he began to tell them the full story. He spoke not of fear or pain, but of the moment the Samaritan shadow fell across his broken body, the moment the world tilted and hate became hollow. The young traders listened, their faces lit by the glow of the setting sun. "And what became of the Samaritan?" one asked softly. The merchant looked toward the horizon. "He keeps walking," he said. "Wherever there is someone in need, that is where he is." When they reached the inn, the merchant saw that someone had built a small stone pillar beside the door. Carved upon it were 3 simple words: "Go and do." That night, as stars spread across the black sky, he realized the story was no longer his alone. It belonged to every traveler who had ever chosen to stop. The road had become a living parable, a sermon without a pulpit, a scripture written in dust and kindness. And somewhere, perhaps far away, the Samaritan walked another road under the same stars, his heart light, his steps steady, knowing that mercy, once set free, never stops moving. Weeks passed. The story of the road of the neighbor spread beyond Jericho, north through the villages, whispered along trade routes, told by shepherds and merchants alike. Some called it a miracle, others a fable. But every telling changed slightly, depending on the heart of the one who told it. Then one day, a teacher came walking that same road. He had no escort, no wealth, only the calm authority of one who carried peace in his very steps. The disciples followed behind him, weary from travel. When they reached the narrow bend where the cliffs leaned close, one of them said, "Master, is this not the cursed road?" Jesus smiled faintly. "Once it was," he said, "but a road is only cursed when men forget compassion." They continued on. The teacher stopped near the place where a pile of stones had been arranged as a small altar. Upon it lay gifts, bread, oil, a cup of water. He touched the stones gently, as if they were alive. "Someone remembered," he whispered. The disciples exchanged puzzled looks, but said nothing. As they entered Jericho, people gathered around. Among them was the merchant, older now, still carrying the same quiet fire in his eyes. When he saw Jesus, he felt something stir deep within him, something he had felt once before on that road when a stranger's shadow had fallen across him. He pushed through the crowd and fell to his knees. "Rabbi," he said, "I have walked the road you spoke of. I was the one who fell, and I was saved by the one we despised." Jesus looked at him, eyes full of both knowing and mercy. "Then you have understood," he said softly. "The law is fulfilled not by who prays the loudest, but by who loves the most." The merchant's voice broke. "I told your story to the city, but I did not know it was yours." Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder. "It has never been mine alone," he said. "Every time one heart stops for another, the story is told again." The people stood silent. The disciples watched, their hearts heavy with awe. Then Jesus turned to them and said, "You have heard the story of the Samaritan. Now walk it. For the kingdom is not found in words, but in the road where mercy is chosen." He smiled at the merchant one last time. "You are healed," he said. "Now heal others." When he moved on, the crowd followed, leaving the road quiet again. But the air was different, alive, waiting. The merchant stood alone by the gate, the same place where he had once been carried half dead. And for the first time in years, he felt whole. He looked back toward the cliffs, where the sun was setting in gold and crimson, and whispered, "That was you all along." The wind stirred through the rocks, soft and sure, as if answering yes. When the teacher left Jericho, his words did not fade. They took root. Like seeds carried by wind, they settled in the hearts of those who had heard him, and in the hearts of those who heard from them. The road between Jerusalem and Jericho became more than a path. It became a parable the world could walk. The merchant began to gather travelers at dusk beside the small pillar near the inn. He told them the story exactly as it had happened, not embellished, not softened. "I was broken," he would say, "and a stranger's mercy became the hand of God." The band's listeners would fall silent. Then he would point to the road and add, "Now the question is not who your neighbor is, but whether you will be one." Among those who listened was a young widow from Samaria. She sold olives and oil and often made the journey north. When she heard the story, she whispered, "It was one of ours." The merchant nodded. "Yes, and I was one of yours the day he stopped." She wept softly and said, "Then the world is not as broken as I feared." Soon she began telling the same story in her own village. From there it traveled to another and another. Each time it crossed a border of prejudice, it lost a little of its old hate and gained a little more truth. A Roman soldier heard it once, far from Judea, and repeated it around his fire. The Samaritan became a good foreigner. The road became the place of the test, yet the heart of it survived. Love is proven not by who you help, but by who you are when help is needed. Years passed. The merchant grew old. His beard turned white, his hands lined like the roads he once feared. Sometimes he would sit by the inn and watch pilgrims pass, smiling when he saw one traveler stop to aid another. "It still lives," he would whisper. "The story still walks." Children began to call him the man of the road. He taught them how to leave jars of water and mark the safe turns with small white stones. When asked why, he would answer simply, "Because someone once left mercy for me." One evening, as twilight folded the desert in violet light, a group of strangers approached him, Jews, Samaritans. even a Roman among them. They had heard of the story and wanted to see the road where it had happened. The merchant rose slowly, leaning on his staff, and led them. As they walked, he said, "Every road is holy when love walks upon it." When they reached the place where he had fallen, he knelt, his old hands trembling. "Here," he said, "here, heaven found me." The strangers knelt beside him. One began to sing softly, an old Samaritan hymn about kindness. Another whispered a prayer in Hebrew. The Roman removed his helmet and bowed his head. The wind moved through them all, weaving their differences into one quiet, golden silence. And the road, once red with blood, now shimmered with peace. Generations passed, but the story did not die. It changed its clothing, wore new tongues, crossed new lands. Children who had never seen the hills of Judea spoke of a stranger who stopped on a lonely road. In one village, he was called a shepherd, in another a traveler, in another simply the good man. The names changed, but the heartbeat remained the same. In a small coastal town, a fisherman told it to his son while mending his nets. "There was once a man who fell among thieves," he said, his hands moving through the rope as though tying mercy into each knot. The boy asked, "Father, what happened to the one who helped him?" The fisherman smiled. "He kept walking. The world always needs someone walking that road." In the North, a teacher wrote the story on parchment for her students, not as law, but as lesson. "There will always be roads," she said, "where love must choose to stop." Her pupils copied it by candlelight, their ink mixing with tears when she read aloud the line. He saw him and was moved with compassion. Even in Rome, where power drowned pity, the parable found its way into hearts weary of conquest. A soldier, home from battle, told his wife, "We thought victory made us righteous, but now I wonder, did we ever stop for the wounded?" Across generations, the story walked quietly, asking the same question of every age: who will stop? Meanwhile, the descendants of the merchant still lived near Jericho. His grandson kept the inn. His granddaughter tended the small altar by the road. Travelers still came, leaving bread and oil. When they asked about the custom, the old woman would smile and say, "Because once mercy passed this way, and we still keep its light burning." One winter evening, a weary scholar stopped there. He listened as she told the tale, how a man was saved by the one he least expected. When she finished, he asked, "Do you believe it truly happened?" The woman looked at the stone beside the door, the same one her grandfather had placed there, and answered, "It happens every day." The scholar left with his heart unsettled. He wrote the story down, not knowing he was writing scripture. He thought he was preserving history. In truth, he was recording heaven's heartbeat. Centuries later, his scroll would be copied again and again until it crossed oceans, kingdoms, and tongues, carried by voices that had never seen the road but somehow knew its dust. Because the story was never bound to geography. It belonged to every soul that ever saw pain and paused long enough to care. The parable had become flesh, living, breathing, repeating itself through hands that healed, through tears that washed another's wounds, through strangers who refused to pass by. And somewhere, unseen, the Samaritan still walked, not as one man, but as the spirit that moves whenever love crosses boundaries. The road no longer ended in Jericho. It stretched across the world. Time became a river, and the story flowed with it. Empires rose, kings died, cities burned. Yet somewhere, always somewhere, One soul stopped on the road. In the age of swords and banners, a soldier crossed a battlefield after the clash. The ground was red, the air thick with the smell of iron and smoke. He heard a cry from among the fallen and turned toward it. The voice belonged to an enemy. For a moment, hate warred with pity. Then the soldier remembered a tale his mother had told. A man beaten, a stranger who stopped. He dropped his sword and lifted the wounded man instead. History would never record his name, but heaven did. Centuries later, in a monastery carved into the mountains, monks copied the story by candlelight. Outside, the wind screamed, but inside, the words glowed. And when he saw him, he had compassion. One young monk paused over the line, his eyes misting. He realized that the ink he poured over the parchment was black as sin, yet when the candlelight hit it, it gleamed like silver. Mercy was like that, he thought, born of darkness, shining anyway. The story traveled on, carried in the saddlebags of pilgrims, sung by bards, whispered by mothers rocking their children. It reached the dark corners of plague and famine, reminding the frightened that kindness was still possible. When whole cities locked their gates, someone always slipped bread through the cracks. When the world seemed to collapse under fear, someone always stayed behind with the dying. They didn't call themselves Samaritans, but they lived the word. And when men discovered new lands across great seas, the story sailed with them. Missionaries carried it, sometimes clumsily, sometimes hypocritically. Yet the parable refused to die, even when those who preached it forgot how to live it. It waited in the cracks, in the quiet hearts of the poor, until someone, somewhere, would remember again what it meant to stop. In every century, in every tongue, the question returned like a tolling bell. Who is my neighbor? And the answer came the same as it had that day on the Jericho road, the one who showed mercy. Even in our own age, where noise drowns reflection and roads are paved with haste, the story still breathes. In hospital corridors where strangers hold hands, in disaster zones where someone carries another through smoke, in city alleys where kindness is still stronger than apathy, the road is still alive. Because the road was never just between Jerusalem and Jericho. It runs through every street, every heart, every choice between indifference and love. And if you listen closely, through the hum of cities, through the rush of years, you can still hear the echo of footsteps slowing and stopping. There came a time when the story was still told, but no longer lived. People recited it in churches, painted it on walls, stitched it into glass, but its heartbeat faded beneath the weight of routine. The words became art instead of instruction, comfort instead of challenge. In the glow of candles, they admired the Samaritan, but few wanted to become him. The road itself seemed forgotten. In cities of marble and light, men built temples to mercy, yet hurried past the hungry. The noise of progress drowned the cry of compassion. The world is too big, they said. How can one heart change it? And so they walked faster, heads down, their hands full of things, their souls empty of time. In one of those cities where glass towers scraped the clouds, a man in a fine coat stood at a crossing, scrolling through his device. At the edge of the street, an old woman slipped on the curb and fell. Dozens saw. None stopped. Traffic swelled. Horns bled, and the man hesitated, just for a heartbeat. Then something ancient stirred within him, a story his grandmother had whispered when he was small. And when he saw him, he had compassion. He knelt. The world moved around him, impatient. He lifted her gently, brushed the dust from her sleeve. Her eyes filled with tears, not from pain but from disbelief. "Why did you stop?" she asked. "Because someone once told me to," he said. No one else noticed. No one applauded. But heaven did. For that single act had cracked the shadow that had settled over a generation. The story, buried under noise, breathed again. In another part of the world, a nurse worked double shifts in a collapsing hospital. When her strength was gone, she remembered the same story and stayed another hour beside a patient no one else would touch. Across oceans, a teacher paid for a child's meal. A driver pulled over for a stranger with a flat tire. None of them thought of parables, but every one of them walked that road again. And so the story, though forgotten by lips, remained alive in deeds. Because truth has its own memory. It waits patiently beneath the dust of neglect, ready to rise whenever love remembers how to stop. The shadows of forgetting could dim its light, but could never extinguish it. For compassion is older than indifference, and mercy outlives every empire built without it. One day, centuries after Jesus first told the parable, a scholar studying ancient texts would write in her journal, "Perhaps the greatest miracle is not that he healed the blind or raised the dead, but that his story keeps choosing new hands to live through." The story had crossed centuries and tongues, survived empires and silence, but now it came to its final destination. Not a city, not a temple, but the human heart, because every soul, sooner or later, finds itself standing on that road. You know the place. It's the moment between comfort and conscience, between the easy step forward and the heavy pause. It's when you see pain you could ignore, when you hear a cry you could pretend not to. It's the crossroads that divides those who pass by from those who stop. Look closely. The road is not ancient stone anymore. It's concrete, under streetlights, hospital hallways, digital screens glowing in the dark. The wounded man still lies there, but he has many faces now. The stranger you avoid, the friend you've grown tired of, the child whose eyes look to you for help, and the priest, the Levite, the Samaritan. They are all you, depending on which moment you choose to listen. The story is not asking who you are, it's asking who you will be. Some days, you are the one who has fallen, broken, unseen, praying someone will notice. You lie there in the silence, wondering if compassion has died. And then, when mercy finds you, in a word, a hand, a small kindness, you realize that love still breathes. That realization changes you more than the wound ever did. Other days, you are the one walking past. You tell yourself there is no time, no strength, that someone else will help. You move on, but something follows you, the whisper of the story you tried to forget. He saw him and passed by on the other side. The echo of those words will not leave you, because deep down, you know you are meant to stop. And sometimes, without warning, you are the Samaritan. You see someone broken, and something inside you refuses to turn away. Your hands move before your mind does. In that moment, you touch eternity, because compassion is not learned, it's remembered. It was always written in you. The road is no longer somewhere in Judea. It runs through your days, through your choices, through your ability to see another's pain and call it your own. When you help, when you forgive, when you sit beside the one everyone else avoids, you walk the same path he once spoke of. You become the answer to the same question the lawyer asked 2,000 years ago. Who is my neighbor? The mirror shows you both faces now, the wounded and the healer. And maybe that's the secret the parable was hiding all along. That mercy saves both. For in every act of compassion, the giver and the receiver rise together. One is lifted from the dust, the other from the prison of indifference. Both are restored. So look again at the road before you. Listen. Can you hear the footsteps slowing? Can you hear your own? Mercy sounds light when spoken, but when lived it has weight. It is not sentiment. It is substance. It costs something every time it is chosen. The Samaritan paid in coin, in time, in danger, in reputation. He risked being mocked by both sides, Jews who hated him for touching one of theirs, and Samaritans who scorned him for helping an enemy. Yet he did not measure the cost. He measured the need. And when mercy measures by need, generosity becomes infinite. Every act of compassion demands surrender, of hurry, of pride, of safety. To stop on the road means to step out of the crowd, to stand still when others walk on, to place another's wound above your comfort. Mercy bends the spine, stains the hands, slows the journey. But when you lift the fallen, you discover a strange exchange. The one you help becomes your mirror, showing you what love really weighs. For love is heavy. It asks for your strength when you have little. It asks you to carry pain that is not your own. It asks you to believe that even one act, one touch, one tear, one stopping, can tip the balance of a world too used to walking away. The weight of mercy is not meant to crush you. It is meant to anchor you, to pull your soul back down from the clouds of self and root it in the soil of humanity. It's the gravity of God's heart, drawing yours nearer to His. Every hand that lifts another carries the same invisible burden. But those who have borne it know the secret, that when you shoulder another suffering, your own grows lighter. That when you stop for the wounded, you are healed of your blindness. That every cost of mercy becomes a currency heaven never forgets. The Samaritan did not leave the road richer in coin. He left it richer in soul. And the one he saved, once healed, carried that same invisible weight forward. The holy burden of gratitude, the calling to stop for others as he was stopped for. Mercy is not efficient. It's not clean. It's not safe. It bleeds. It bends. It delays. But it is divine. And every time the world feels too dark, too cruel, too busy, remember this. The light that breaks the darkness does not come from lightning or thunder. It comes from the quiet flame of one heart willing to stop. So when you feel the heaviness of compassion, when love costs you time, comfort, or pride, don't call it loss. Call it worship, because that is what mercy truly is. Love made visible and costly and real. The years had gathered quietly upon the merchant, soft as dust on stone. His beard turned silver, his gait slower, but his eyes still carried the same fire that had once lit the road to Jericho. He had lived long enough to see mercy ripple outward, through families, villages, and hearts he would never meet. Yet as time drew him closer to the horizon of his days, one road still called to him, the road where everything began. One dawn, before the city stirred, he wrapped himself in a plain cloak, took his staff, and set out. The air was cool, touched by the scent of rain. Birds circled above the cliffs, calling to each other across the ravine. He walked slowly, his steps sure despite the years, following the familiar turns carved into memory. When he reached the narrow pass where the rocks closed in, he stopped. The silence was deep there, the kind of silence that holds the memory of prayers long finished. He looked around and smiled. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The same stones, the same sky, but the ghosts of his past were no longer heavy. They had become companions. He knelt beside the spot where he had once fallen. The sand was smooth now, washed countless times by rain and mercy. He placed his palm upon the earth and whispered, "Here I was found." A sound broke the stillness. Hooves on stone. He turned. Down the bend came a young traveler, burdened with goods, his face anxious. Behind him, another figure stumbled, a man clutching his side, blood seeping through torn cloth. The merchant's heart tightened. The scene unfolded like a memory reborn. The young traveler hesitated, glancing at the injured man, then at the horizon. His lips pressed into a thin line. His pace quickened. The merchant called out, "Son!" The traveler stopped, startled by the voice. "Help him," the old man said gently. "Do not pass by." The traveler frowned. "He's not my kin. I can't afford to be delayed." The merchant's eyes softened. Neither could the one who saved me. Something in his tone, steady, sorrowful, sure, cut through the young man's excuses. Slowly, the traveler knelt beside the wounded stranger. The merchant smiled, the light in his eyes deep as dawn. "Good," he whispered. "Now, let me show you how." Together they bound the man's wounds. The merchant's hands trembled, but his movements were sure. He poured oil, tore strips from his own cloak, pressed gently until the bleeding slowed. The young traveler watched in silence, learning not from words, but from witness. When the wounded man was safely lifted onto the donkey, the merchant placed his hand over the traveler's. "Remember," he said softly, "mercy must keep walking." The traveler nodded, eyes glistening. He guided the donkey forward, the wounded man swaying gently with each step. The merchant watched until they disappeared around the bend. The wind stirred, carrying with it the echo of hooves fading into the horizon. He closed his eyes. A peace deeper than breath settled over him. He had walked the full circle of mercy, once fallen, then lifted, then lifting others. He sat upon a rock, the sun warming his face, the same sun that had once watched him bleed. He whispered, "Thank you, Lord, that I was found worthy to stop." The wind answered softly, rustling through the canyon like the sigh of 1,000 remembered acts of love. He smiled, leaned back, and let the road cradle him. No longer the place of his fall, but the place of his redemption. And when the sun reached its zenith, the merchant's breath slowed, his eyes half closed in quiet wonder. They found him hours later, seated peacefully, a faint smile on his lips. Beside him lay his staff and the same small stone he had carried all his life, now resting in his open palm. The young traveler led the wounded man toward Jericho as the sun sank behind the cliffs. Each step echoed through his chest, steady and slow, matching the rhythm of the heart that had begun to change inside him. The old man's words, "Mercy must keep walking," played again and again in his thoughts like a prayer he had never known he needed. When they reached the inn, the keeper ran out to meet them. "Another one?" he asked, astonished. "You found another hurt soul on the road?" The traveler nodded. "Not I," he said. "We found each other." They tended the man's wounds through the night, and when dawn came, the traveler paid the keeper, adding extra coin for whatever more might be needed. He paused before leaving and looked down at his hands, stained with blood, dirt, oil, and something invisible yet eternal. He understood now what the old man had meant, that mercy was not clean, but holy. Before leaving, he stepped outside to breathe the cool morning air. A few paces away, by the road's edge, he saw a rock, flat and smooth, as if waiting. On impulse, he picked it up and carried it back inside. He placed it beside the door of the inn, carving 3 words into it with the tip of his knife. He stopped here. It was not artful, but it was true. Years passed and travelers began to notice the stone. Some added their own marks, a cross, a name, a date. Others left bread, oil, or water beneath it. The inn became known as the house of the neighbor. Pilgrims came not only for shelter, but to sit near that stone and listen to its silence. The young traveler grew older, took over the inn, and told the story to every soul who would listen. He never called it the parable. To him, it was a memory of an old man on a road, of hands that healed, of eyes that saw what others ignored. He taught his children the same way the merchant had taught him, not through rules but through roads. When you see suffering, he said, you'll feel 2 voices. One will tell you to keep walking. The other will whisper, stop. Choose the whisper. And so the legacy continued. The story became seed again, planted in new hearts, growing in unseen ways. Shepherds told it to their flocks beneath the stars. Sailors spoke it over the roar of waves. Mothers wove it into lullabies. Scholars turned it into scripture, and wanderers turned it into life. One cold night, centuries later, a stranger seeking shelter stumbled upon the same inn, now rebuilt but still standing on the same foundation. The stone still lay by the door, its words faint but legible. He stopped here. The traveler touched it and smiled, not knowing whose hands had carved it, only feeling that he should add his own mark. He placed his palm on the stone and whispered, "So will I." And thus the story never ended. It only found new travelers to carry it forward, each one hearing the same eternal question whispered across time: who is my neighbor? And in the quiet of every heart willing to answer, heaven spoke again: the one who stops. There is a road that never ends. It runs through deserts and cities, across centuries and skin, through silence and song. It begins in the heart of God and winds through every human soul that dares to love. If you stand still long enough, you can hear it. The hum beneath history, the rhythm of footsteps that never stopped. They belong to the ones who carried another's weight, who knelt in the dust and made the ground holy. The road from Jerusalem to Jericho still exists, but it has changed its shape. It's there when a mother holds the child of a stranger. It's in the arms that catch a falling elder, the hand that steadies a trembling friend, the heart that forgives before being asked. Wherever compassion interrupts the world's hurry, the old road appears again, shimmering just beneath the surface of time. And still he walks it, the teacher, unseen but not absent, silent but not gone. His shadow stretches across every act of kindness, his voice hidden in the pause before a helping hand. The words he spoke 2,000 years ago are not relics. They are breath. Every time a heart slows down long enough to care, he speaks them again. Go and do likewise. The Samaritan, the merchant, the traveler, the innkeeper, all of them became dust, but the mercy they carried became seed, and the world keeps blooming from it still. It grows in hospital corridors and refugee camps, in homes where forgiveness replaces pride, in lives rebuilt because someone refused to pass by. The parable was never meant to end. It was meant to awaken, to remind us that heaven is not a destination but a direction, the one that bends toward another's pain. So now the road lies before you. It runs through your days and choices, through every intersection where compassion could be chosen. You may not see the wounded man until you slow down. You may not hear the cry until the noise fades. But when you do, you will feel the same stillness the Samaritan felt, the same divine heartbeat that whispered, "Stop." And when you stop, the world stops with you, just for a moment, and something eternal steps through. That is the kingdom. Not far, not someday, but here, between one breath and the next, between your heart and another's need. The road goes on. It winds through time, through you, through me. And every time mercy chooses to walk again, the story lives. Because love, the kind that stops, is forever on the road home. Soft fade, wind over distant hills, footsteps in dust, a whisper carried on light. Go and do likewise.